English learners may lose balance and wipe out when they study. And that's a problem. If we don't have a clear, balanced way as a learner or even as a teacher, we're going to feel frustrated. I'm Joseph Poulshock, PhD, aka Dr. Shock. My PhD is from the University of Edinburgh in linguistics. Edinburgh is in Scotland, and you know that Scotland is great. I have over 25 years teaching experience, teaching English to English learners, and over 10 years experience teaching how to teach English to English teachers. I am currently a professor in the School of International Communication at Tsinghua University, and I've published a bunch of stuff. Excuse me. Here's one: Graded Liberal Arts and Sciences for Language Education. This is basically how to take stories in sciences and educational stories in the liberal arts and make them easy and understandable and enjoyable for language learning. This video here is also separate from my university work at Tsinghua University. So let's get started. If your study lacks balance, then you need a clear framework for learning. And if your teaching lacks balance, then you also need a clear framework for teaching. And one great solution is Paul Nation's famous Four Strands, where you balance 4 kinds of learning activities to make your journey of learning more powerful and more fun. So what are the 4 strands? Well, number one is to get meaningful input. Get lots of meaningful input. And number 2 is to push meaningful output. Now notice here, the key word here is meaningful. So when we're talking about meaningful input, we're not really talking about grammar exercises or grammar drills or repeating after the teacher or whatnot. These are messages. It's meaningful, interesting, enjoyable, storyful input and output. And that's what we mean when we talk about input. Strand number 3 is to boost fluency. Focus on fluency by practicing easy texts fast. You can't practice fast a text that is hard, so that's why the emphasis is on boosting fluency by practicing easy texts fast. And also the 4th strand is to focus on grammar or language focus, words or text structure, and notice that this is getting about 25% of your focus. And we'll see that later on in this video that most people, most students, most teachers do not only use grammar 25% of the time. They do it much more. So what anyway? Why should we care? Well, the key word here is balance and also a focus, a main focus on meaning. Please notice that this is different from what teachers and learners usually do. Recently, I gave a survey to my students, and in high school, 50% of my students spent 80% of their time doing grammar drills and exercises. Okay, so if you enjoy, for example, easy and interesting stories, this works as a best way to power up your English. Stories work. Storyfied, storyful language works as the best way to put language in your brain. But over 50% of my students spend 84% of their time not enjoying stories. They spend over 84% of their time not enjoying stories, even though storyful input is the most powerful way to put English language or any language in your brain. And what about using English for communication? Did my students do that in school? No. Over 50% of my students spent 84% of their time, study time, not communicating. But the purpose of language is communication, and the best way to learn language, acquire language, is through communication. Wait a minute, but don't we need grammar? Well, of course, yes, we do. We can do grammar study. Grammar study is good, but we need to balance grammar study with a focus on communication. And when we study grammar, we also need to focus on the most common bits. Grammar, there are some grammar points that are rare that we don't use very often, and some that we use all the time. So focusing on grammar study is important to focus on the most common grammar rules and bits. And also remember that we can acquire grammar naturally. We can study grammar directly and learn rules and things like that, but you can also acquire grammar naturally through understanding and also producing messages through communication. And when we do that, when we're listening to stories or reading stories or having communication, we can pay attention to bits of grammar in messages. Notice that in this sentence here, I underline the endings of words because I want to emphasize or highlight the grammar bits, the grammar parts in communication. So we can be aware of grammar bits as we listen, as we speak, as we read, right? We call this noticing or consciousness raising. Pay attention to the bits of grammar in communication. And we can also memorize useful sentences, not thinking about grammar, but just memorize a sentence, memorize a phrase, memorize a chunk. For example, here's one, strike a balance. That's a phrase that you can just memorize as it is. Or another one, mix it up, mix things up. Again, balancing the four strands. Here's what Paul Nation says in his book, What Should Every EFL Teacher Know? It's really my favorite book for language teaching and language teachers. He says, only a relatively small amount of time in a well-balanced language course should involve deliberate focus on grammar. Only a relatively small amount of time for focusing deliberately on grammar study. So the question is now, what should we do? Well, applying the four strands, here are some ideas. 1, get meaningful input, right? Stories, songs, videos, and then talk story at your level. Talking story is a Hawaiian phrase. It's about communicating, visiting, enjoying, chatting. And when you talk story, you're getting input and output, right? And then, of course, push meaningful output, right? For example, you could write a daily gratitude journal. What are you thankful for? It's good for your brain, good for your heart, good for your soul, but also good for your English. Write a daily gratitude journal and then share your gratitude with your friends and family. 3, listen to fast music, look at the lyrics, and then practice singing or rapping it fluently. So this is a fluency practice activity, singing a song, memorizing a song, being able to sing it quickly and fluently. That's a good fluency practice. For grammar study, right, read a story and then circle all the verbs or the word endings or the relative clauses in that story. So here's an example, right? So in this printed material, the red words are underlined. The words that are underlined in red, those are all past tense verbs. The words that are underlined in blue, those are all present tense verbs. And the words that are underlined in purple is the gerund is the be plus the gerund. And the words that are underlined in green are the be verb plus the past participle. So again, if you read this story and you look at that, each different highlighted text, this is called textual enhancement. And if you do it a lot, it can help you be aware of grammar and how grammar is used in English. So again, read a story, circle all the verbs or underline the verbs or the word endings, relative clauses, so that you're focusing on grammar as you also enjoy a message. And finally, chat with friends face-to-face or on Zoom. Join our school community. You can check it out. There'll be a link in the description. So in the end, let's remember, don't wipe out as you study English, but strike a balance. And the key point again is balance learning activities to make learning powerful and fun. Use the guidance of the four strands, right? So do meaningful input, storyful input, interesting input, easy to understand input, and then push output. Communicate with friends. Write down your gratitude journal. Push some output. And then practice on fluency, right? Practice easy text using a stopwatch so you can improve your fluency. And then do some grammar or language focus as well. But in Nation's framework, the four strands, that's going to be 25% of your time. I am Joseph Poulshock, aka Dr. Shock. I am an expert language coach at languagesuperpowers.com, a content creator at ReadOasis.com, and I also have a school community at school. Thank you so much.